let's say hi to the people. Rick Thompson is here, people.
I am here on the show. That's beautiful.
Not the world's best sound quality, but of course we are dealing with the tone of Rick's voice, so there's nothing we can do about that. But we are glad to hear from him regardless.
My voice has a beautiful quality, even if your radio doesn't have a good quality, so don't worry about it.
I think I was saying something very similar to that, if I'm not mistaken. So, hey,
could be.
We were talking about this without having much more to say, and I've talked in circles, of course, and we never got the real lowdown yet until now. How did the meeting go? What kind of topics were covered? What were some possible results and points of interest?
Okay, so the meeting today was very big on public input. There were 5 different segments at which they took public input, including the general public commentary, as well as 4 different subtopics. Now, the 4 subtopics we discussed today were daily purchase limits, THC limits on marijuana-infused products, insurance, and then we also spoke about financial fitness and license requirements. Probably the biggest bombshell of the day came as a result of the financial fitness and license requirements conversation, as it was revealed that the License and Regulatory Affairs want you to have $500,000 in liquidity available for them to peruse if you want to apply for a Class C 1,500 plant license. It drops down to about $3,000 for a provisioning center. I'm sorry, $300,000 in liquid assets available if you want to apply for a provisioning center or for a Class B 1,000 plant cultivation facility. It's about $150,000, I think, for a Class A 500 plant facility. Safety compliance centers and transport have to have like 100 or 200,000 available in liquidity.
Wow, that is a bombshell, and not what I was envisioning. And what kind of solidity are there on those numbers? Is that it, or is that still being discussed?
Director Brisboe delivered them as if they were finalized. I will say that there was a lot of pushback on those numbers, not only from the audience participants, who incorporated a ton of different occupations, attorneys, people currently in the industry, people that were hopeful, but also from board members as well, including Mr. David LaMontagne. Mr. LaMontagne actually referred to that price structure as un-American and said several other really positive statements in defense of mom-and-pop industries. Also, Vivian Pickard was very concerned. She's an African-American, and she, as many of the rest of us feel, seem to believe that an aggressive pricing structure like that would discriminate against persons of color or persons who may have been the most seriously victimized by the drug war, because our resources are notoriously limited.
Now, she spoke out a little bit, and we get an idea of where she's coming from. And I mean, that's a little bit better than we've defined her. I mean, we were kind of unsure. She said some things that were not bad, that's for sure, but that sounds pretty positive to me.
Yeah, she was. However, I don't think any of them have any influence or factor on the outcome of that. That was decided before the license board was even convened, based on the surprise and the responses from the board members. I don't think they were told about it ahead of time. Not even a little bit.
At least they had the forum to speak, and when they did, they spoke out about how it seemed like it was kind of excessive, and I'm sure they heard that from the people, too. I would like to think that if they get all that feedback, that they might have to consider looking at these numbers.
Well, we don't know how solid they are because we don't know how they were derived. When challenged to back up the numbers, they said things like, well, we took a look at the other 4 or 5 states that are similar to us, and they were all higher. But you and I both know that there are medical or CBD-only laws in about 34 states. So if they only compared us to 5, that means there were an awful lot of other states that did less strict, stringent rules. So the insurance requirements seemed, relatively straightforward. They are requiring, obviously, product liability insurance and then other different types of insurance based on which of the 5 types of industries you're associated with. They did not mandate things like unemployment insurance and the rest of that because that's already covered under other statutes in the state law. So there's no reason for them to even, get into it.
But another reminder to prospective licensees that there's, all those considerations, along with the specific cannabis requirements still in these operations.
Jamie, I really couldn't hear you. I apologize.
I just said that you're mentioning that they didn't get deeper into that because they already exist in state statute is a reminder to those who are prospective licensees that there's a lot more things besides the specific cannabis requirements involved in these operations.
Well, there's also concerns about requiring 2 years of documented work history or documented tax history and all the rest of that too. So there were some other little gems in there that might make it difficult for people currently in the industry to qualify. But there were a lot of concerns about integrity and process. A lot of people said some of the same things we're talking about right now.
The $10,000 fee for the 500-plant garden was pitched as being the thing that caregivers could potentially transition into. And that would be, they use the licensing number as that basis. And so now to say that you have to demonstrate $150,000 in reserves, and it has to be seasoned money, that puts those very people that was designed to allow an ability to transition into the commercial market, a lot of them out of the picture.
That's what a lot of people said today, Jamie. Exactly right. They said, look, we're trying to transition from 72 plants to 500. And if we could aggregate a bunch of caregivers together, maybe we could put together, a $250,000 that we're supposed to have, or $200,000 that we're supposed to have. But if you've got other rules about needing this proof or that proof, we may not be able to come up with that. And how are we going to deal with that? And there really was no easy answer. I believe that the situation is kind of going to be that if you can't prove that you've been doing things book straight for a couple of years, then we're going to have a difficult time getting qualified into this. Matthew Abel, as well as other people, mentioned that Lara could slide in some kind of rules in regards to allowing caregivers to aggregate. That was not taken off the table. So that's still possible. The other conversations regarding THC content, they said there will not be any control on the content of THC concentrates or THC oils. However, manufactured products like topicals and edibles and other things will be controlled as far as THC content and dosage. There was a 6% cap on THC content for topicals by volume, and that was met with a lot of
why?
resentment by the community too, because why put any kind of a THC limit on topicals? If you just properly label it, then you don't have to minimize
an edible,
or maximize what someone can use.
It's an edible. Typically, they put stuff in there you're not going to consume,
right.
And if you want to beef up the THC or whatever because it might help out that skin application, then who cares?
The other thing that was discussed was daily purchase limits. The MMFLA language requires the board to come up with a daily purchase limit, so it's not like they can choose to or not choose to. And what they decided is they could not set a limit smaller than the 2.5 ounces that were all guaranteed as patients and caregivers, which we all thought was common sense, but it seemed like a revelation to them. Then they also said, Director Briscoe of the BMMR said he did not believe statutorily he had the power to set a monthly or weekly purchase limit.
Because it wasn't addressed.
Was, first of all, yay, but second of all, very intelligent on their part.
Yeah, they said specifically daily, right? So they're saying that they didn't say look at it from a monthly perspective or weekly perspective, daily.
No, but that was suggested previously as part of the work groups and in other conversations, is that if you let people buy 2.5 a day, by the end of the week they've bought 7 2.5-ounce purchases, and isn't that kind of an indicator of diversion? That would be a Don Bailey type perspective. But obviously they can make their own determination about things like that.
Yeah, I'm just saying that he might have derived that because the legislation says daily. That was their mission to carry that out, not anything else.
Right.
True. Yep. That's why Director Brisboe said that. You're right. And that if they wanted to set any kind of an additional limit, that would have to come from the legislature as a result of a modification of the MMFLA. So that was interesting. There were a lot of concerns about startup facilities, whether or not people could access seeds in the regulated system or clones in the regulated system. And just to set the record straight, caregivers are allowed to sell clones to cultivation facilities in the MMFLA. So those type of issues really aren't an issue. But this just goes to speak to the general education level of a lot of the people that are participating here. There's not a ton of communication coming on some of the specifics that we're talking about from Lara to the citizens. So there's this knowledge gap. And we should have already addressed this a long time ago, because that's pretty basic stuff.
And was there any discussion anywhere, although not directly related to this meeting, but being in Lansing and this topic coming up, any discussion of the pending legislation concerning keeping dispensaries open or any other related cannabis legislation?
It was brought up, but only briefly. And the response Director Brisboe gave was that, until we get something actually passed by the legislature, I'm not even going to hypothesize about what that might entail or what it might affect. There was really zero discussion about shutting down dispensaries. There really wasn't any discussion at all about it. So I think we're to the point now where the director said it's going to be an impediment to your process, but that we're no longer having a conversation about hurting people. However, I did hear, just through the grapevine, and this is not confirmed, that there was some agency offering grants to different SWAT teams across the state that were going to take down dispensaries. So I don't know how valid that is or anything else, but I'm definitely going to look into it, because if there's a financial reward for people coming after our distribution centers, they have to interrupt that shit. That's wrong.
Well, I guess if the theory of big money influence wanting to control more of the market and kind of behind the idea that existing places should get shuttered to open up those markets and locations, that money could be invested to grant law enforcement agencies to help them out in that quest. So I'm not too surprised that would be discussed or might even be a plan.
Well, there were a couple of notable things that happened. I don't remember the gentleman's name, but one guy tried to serve papers. He did serve papers onto Don Bailey, an official warrant, or subpoena, rather, an official subpoena on Don Bailey in the middle of the proceedings right in front of everybody. He got the cordless mic, pulled it out of the stand, walked right up to him and said, "I'm here to serve you, Don Bailey, for physical assault in the Don Koschmeider case."
Wow.
So that was kind of interesting, I thought.
No other details. No idea who is the lawyer, perhaps, or who brought the suit. Was it Don himself from behind bars, or what? Any more
No
details?
details.
No details.
We
That'll
got
be interesting.
nothing other than that, gentleman spoke several times during the meeting. So.
And I'm sure Don Bailey just took it in stride.
He must have been sitting on those papers for a while till he got to the very end to serve Mr. Bailey. Mr. Bailey seemed nonplussed, although he turned incredibly red, as you might imagine. That's a lot of embarrassment to take. He didn't allow it to affect himself. He didn't directly address the issue. So, in one instance, I gotta say, the guy held it together like a decent human being. So,
probably in his mind a non-issue. He probably is not showing up for any deposition anywhere. Doesn't plan to get any consequence for it, and just
I agree.
The guy got his little bit of theater in there, and that's about all it will amount to. I hope not, though, because he did screw around with Don's life, and if he gets a little consequence for that, I would not be too upset.
Chad Morrow spoke several times. Chad said, I come from Gaylord, where we used to have dispensaries, but now they're all rated. And then there's this town called Traverse City just to the north of us, and they got all shut down. And then there's this town to the east of us called Atlanta, and they got all shut down. So now, all of the places that used to have safe access don't anymore. So north of like Saginaw, it's kind of shitty up there. Chad spoke twice and let him know both times how he felt.
And no response on that stuff? Was there any interaction with either Brisboe or the board members on these questions or these input from the public?
No, these are during the public comment, so there's no interactivity. You're not, even if you ask a question, they're not obligated to answer you. And in fact, only one time did they respond to any inquiry made by a person in the audience. So the majority of the times,
we brought up earlier, it's one of the advantages of going to the MICBD conference because some of these representatives will come there and speak. And there is an interactive question and answer scenario, and a lot of information or more details about some of the things they were discussing can come out, and it makes it worthwhile. Any discussion at all about stacking?
There was several people that brought stacking up, and Director Brisboe mentioned stacking only to the point where he was detailing out
stacking
some of
real
the
quick.
recent memos that were listed out.
Explain
One
stacking
person
real quick.
advocated for, if you're stacking, that you should have a smaller second application fee because that.
Can you explain what stacking is real quick? So when we talk about it further,
There are two different types of what we call vertical integration or stacking. Vertical integration involves one particular person holding several different kinds of licenses. For example, a retailer who also processes, who also grows. 3 different types of licenses with one person. That's called vertical integration. Stacking is when one single person has multiple licenses of exactly the same kind. For example, if you had multiple Class C growing licenses, where you could grow 1,500 plants per license, so you could potentially have 3 licenses and grow 4,500 plants. That would be stacking. So stacking was largely decried because many people pointed out that obviously we want more people to be able to benefit, not less. Making some cajillionaires instead of a lot of millionaires just doesn't make sense unless you happen to be the cajillionaire yourself. But there were some advocates of the stacking program, including the one gentleman who thought that if you were required to have $500,000 liquidity for your first Class C license, that you should have a lesser requirement for your second Class C license and for your third Class C license.
And down the line.
Your fourth Class C license.
Yeah.
And that would certainly make it a lot easier to acquire multiple licenses like that. However, my personal opinion is I'd rather have 3 500 plant licenses than 1 1,500 plant license. If there's a concern regarding a crop, if pesticides have been used inappropriately or accidentally, if it's infested with mites or powdery mildew, or for whatever reason, power goes off, you lose water, a million things could happen. If you lose a gigantic crop like 4,500 plants through one act, the entire community across the state suffers. It's much better to have those plants in multiple locations to ensure that the supply of cannabis isn't negatively impacted by one person's idiocy or by a single act of nature.
So there'll be different kind of methods of growing and that kind of stuff that'll be applied, and maybe some of those gardens will be segmented and portions can be saved. But your point is like to have these separate facilities, so something happens to one, things are still moving on the others. So one of the reasons I bring it up is, as of now, as far as the department is concerned, people can stack. I don't know what they're going to do about if you have to have the $500,000 for each license, or if they will make a move on a descending order, or if those will even be the final numbers before it's all over. We won't know for a little bit.
They did say that you would have to have an additional $500,000 of liquidity proof for each one of the Class C licenses that you receive.
All right, good. So it's kind of prohibitive. Only a few people can really do it. Some people don't like that concept, I'm sure. And at the conference, MICBD conference, in conversation with a few people, one of the lobbyists just casually kind of told me that there is a anti-stacking bill, some legislation that may be coming forward soon. Did any discussion about that or any knowledge of that?
Jimmy, define that legislation. I didn't hear what you said.
Anti-stacking legislation.
There is what's sometimes referred to as cleanup legislation coming across. That would be, excuse me, a bill that would make multiple changes to the MMFLA. Smaller, fix this or fix that or fix the other thing. And that's been talked about for quite some time. So I imagine that they've just been trying to locate all of the things they want to get fixed in this bill, because you can really only do that once. I don't think the legislature is likely to pass a second bill amending the same act in the same session.
So the
we'll probably see that.
An anti-stacking legislation was discussed at MICBD just kind of informally on the side, and I don't know if it's part of this larger comprehensive thing or they're trying to get somebody to introduce something to specifically address it. That's kind of what it sounded like, but I don't have the details on it.
No, it sounds like that. And sometimes we share with our listeners some of the rumors and some of the things we hear. We always like to preface it. It's a little bit different than some of the news-related things when we discuss the factual reporting of what happened in today's session. So it is different, and I'm glad you made that distinction.
Yeah. So anything else of interest happening in the Lansing area where you are of the meeting? Anything else to leave us with on this issue at least?
Well, the number of available centers in the state is dwindling rapidly. We're seeing Lansing, still talking about potentially eliminating all of their 70 distribution centers and then reinventing the industry here locally with about 20 to 25 centers. So as one of the last places in the central Michigan area where there's a large concentration of availability, that could significantly impact patients. And when Don Bailey says things like, Don Bailey, member of the licensing board, former Michigan State police officer, really not a very patient-friendly guy. When Don Bailey says things like, it doesn't matter about dispensaries because patients can always find caregivers, that's not correct. And I don't think anybody who actually is a patient believes that it's just so easy to go find a quality caregiver. So shuttering facilities and creating a lot of patients who have need but now have no source means two things in my mind. First of all, a bunch of patients are going to get victimized by people who don't operate under the regular guise of the way we normally treat patients in our community.
Like when we first got started.
Pardon?
Like when we first got started, there were opportunists who kind of took advantage at times.
Yep. And second of all, they're really shooting themselves in the foot, because what you want, if you're the incoming market, what you want is to take a current consumer base and just fold it from the gray market into your white market. Okay? If what you do is you let all of those patients go and find black market sources, you have to now, as a new industry, recruit those medical marijuana patients from their black market sources into your brick and mortar buildings. It's much easier to take somebody who's already using brick and mortar and just tell them go to a different brick and mortar building. But to get someone to buy into the medical system that they feel already jerked them over and took away their opportunity, that's going to be a tough sell for a lot of those people. And the medical patient population will take a hit because of it. You mark my words.
Well, that's unfortunately, without some kind of common sense prevailing with this rollout, seems to be the case, and I think unfortunately you're right. So are you going to?
I am going to have to. Go ahead.
Are you going to have to go because we're kicking you off anyway?
Yeah, get out.
Yeah, that actually works out pretty well.
Okay,
Rick,
well,
thank you.
Just let it be known we kicked you off. You didn't leave voluntarily. That's all.
Right.
You're fired.
Rick, thank you, man, for calling in. It was huge having you because
that's good info.
waiting on it.
Now we are updated on what's going on, and I'm left with a little bit of concern over some of these numbers for participation, the financial fitness stuff. That's going to have to get discussed a little bit more.
There were a number of reporters in the room because Licensing and Regulatory Affairs put out a press release announcing that they were going to talk about these sensitive issues. So I'm sure we can start reading about it in traditional news media, and that we'll have a greater report on what we read and what we learned at our next episode of the Jazz Cabbage Cafe.
Oh, yeah, nice plug.
All right. We'll look forward to having you back in studio next week, and I need a minute to really think about this. Maybe we can take a break for a second.
Yeah. Let it set in. Over doobie. Rick, thanks again, man. And he's not going to be here after the break, so Have a good day, Rick. And we're going to be back, though, with the Jazz Cabbage Cafe in just a few minutes.